Efstathios, welcome CFO at Home. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Good being here.
So, I understand that you started your career working for banks as an attorney. What led you from that career to the work you're doing today, which is really on the other side of the table, focusing on financial advocacy for consumers?
Yes. I worked for different banks for 5 years, and I saw how to banks consumers were a file number, but the case before the court was not just a file number for the consumer, it was their livelihood, their paycheck. It was a stressful situation. So I decided to take all the knowledge that I gained during those 5 years as a bank attorney and advocate for consumers and help out consumers at a reasonable rate and offer them sound advice.
And I'm really grateful to have a professional on who has taken on this topic, because I think as a lot of the advice, quote unquote, that you will find, let's say, online or on that commercial on television at 3 o'clock in the morning, or where you have tendency to find information about handling situations with extreme debt or debt consolidation loans or whatever, that whole world is just teeming with people who I'm not sure have the good intentions that you do. I can't say that for sure, but it is really great to find somebody who has the professional credentials that you do. So obviously, to me, that says that you have a real heart for the consumer. And that's not what a lot of people can say who are in your line of work. So thank you for doing that. One thing I wanted to ask you about was I read a statement, I believe, on your website. You believe that debt should be seen as a solvable challenge instead of a personal failure. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Absolutely. For many, debt is something that they feel ashamed of, that they don't want to discuss, and so they want to ignore it. Now, if you're involved in a lawsuit, the last thing you want to do is ignore a lawsuit because it can cause the creditor to get a default judgment against you, and then you give them an automatic win. So you should never give anybody a free pass. And as a consumer, there's many reasons why people go into debt, and it's not something that should be stigmatized. It's something that happens. It happens more often than not. In the United States today, we have 1.3 trillion in consumer credit card debt. It's one of the most, or the one of the largest figures that we have, actually. Medical debt is also another one. Student loan debt is another one. So definitely credit card debt is a big deal in this country, and why you mentioned before, you'll see a lot of advertisements on TV or the internet, social media about debt consolidation, loans, or debt settlement companies. So yeah, definitely people should speak up and not feel stigmatized.
Yeah, and to reference or to give some context what we're talking about here, when we talk about debt, is there a kind of an average or typical amount of debt that your clients are dealing with?
So it can be anywhere from $5,000 to over $100,000. Right now, I have clients who are dealing with $5,000 in debt, or just a little bit above it. And then I have a client who's dealing with over $100,000 in credit card debt. Everybody gets into debt for their own reasons. The individual who is in debt for over 100,000 had a business that they were trying to keep afloat during COVID, and COVID was a very difficult time for many businesses, and he ended up not being able to survive. So that's something we're working on now. And there's no real, average debt. It varies by person to person.
But I would assume that the common denominator, particularly if a person is seeking out the services of someone like yourself, whether it's $5,000 or $100,000, relative to the assets that they have and their ability to even make payments on it, it's really stretching them.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's the common denominator. So if you're in that situation, it really doesn't matter what the number is. Yeah,
correct,
yeah. If
correct.
it's impeding your ability to live a normal life and keeping you up at night, yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Any help that you can get is a good thing. So
Yes.
so we've both touched a little bit on the advice out there for people who are struggling with debt, looking for some form of debt relief. And there's a lot of bad information out there, a lot of misconceptions. What do you find the biggest misconceptions are that people who are struggling with debt or perhaps are facing some legal action, perhaps with some type of lawsuit to pay back their debt? And these are the people who come to you every day. As you talk to them, what do you find their biggest misconceptions are?
So one thing is if you're not in court and you're just behind on your credit card bill, and you're either 30 days behind or 60 days or approaching 90 days, where what's called a charge off period by the credit card company at the 90-day mark, they'll charge it off and send it to a collection law firm, which is one of the firms I worked for. What happens is the national companies will advocate to their clients to basically stop paying the credit card company. That's really not sound advice. You should actually be negotiating with the credit card company as soon as you can. And it really hurts a person's credit score. If you tell them to stop paying, the bank is going to report it to the credit card that you're now delinquent 30 days, 60 days, and so on and so forth. And just to go into a little bit with the national companies, they don't have attorneys in your home state. So if there is a lawsuit, they don't have the ability to represent you in court. And that's a big factor that I saw when I was an attorney for the bank and I dealt with many of these clients from national companies. They would get them on the phone, they would actually be stressed out, and I would try to explain to them, the judge would as well, you have the ability to terminate your relationship and to resolve the debt on your own if you've been with them for such a long period of time. So they just have a different structure of how they work and their business model than mine.
Yeah, and I imagine some of that may come from different priorities. You
Yeah,
mentioned credit score in what you just shared with us. Is credit score management part of the strategy that you recommend to clients, as in, this is the best way to handle this situation without wrecking your credit score?
great question. So I definitely bring that up with the client and I tell the client we can do there's a two-prong approach. The first prong is debt consolidation, which means that we're going to take your multiple accounts together. So if you're making five payments to five different banks, we're going to make that into one monthly payment and we're not going to reduce the principal amount. And the second prong is debt settlement, which reduces the principal amount by a significant amount, sometimes 50%, most oftentimes 65%, down to 65%. But in that approach, which is the business model for national companies, your credit score will be impacted pretty dramatically. And I tell the clients, how is your credit score? If you're planning to make a major purchase or you're interested about your credit score, then debt settlement is probably not the approach we should be taking. We should be thinking about doing debt consolidation. And more often than not, if they're coming to me, their credit score has been at least slightly impacted. So they're not able to go to a bank and get a loan out. Or if they do get a loan out with a bank, the interest rate is going to be pretty high today on a personal loan. Some companies charge over 20% for a personal loan. So I definitely lay it out for them, and together we come with an educated approach to it.
So, do you find at times that there are clients that this may sound like an odd question, but it went through my mind.
Sure.
Clients that maybe for their situation and their true objectives might be a little too concerned about their credit score because it seems like there was a time where keep a good credit score was really some of the only financial advice people were given in
Right.
everything they did, at least people I know in my circles. Everything was done through the lens of how will this affect my credit score? Is Are there situations where maybe to achieve the greater objective, maybe you're trying to get rid of this debt as quickly as possible? Are there times where there's an approach that says, hey, this is going to ding my credit score for a minute, but it's going to get me out of debt quicker or achieve some other objective?
So, great points you bring up. What I like to educate the client about is be upfront with them at all times and tell them that, listen, you want to choose debt settlement, that's not going to be a problem. You should be aware, though, that your credit score will take a significant hit. But the good news is it's not going to be, it's something you can recover from. And it'll take you anywhere from 6 to 24 months for your credit score to recover. Of course, you hear about these different credit repair companies and the fees that they charge, and some are reputable and some are not, just like in my field. I don't think credit score should be the be all end all. We shouldn't focus on credit score too much because more often than not, when a client has come to my office, their credit score has been impacted. But some people do have some major purchases to do within the next 12 to 16 months. So they tell me, hey, counsel, this is my situation. And I say, okay, then we should do debt consolidation instead of debt settlement.
So you just walk your clients through the process
Yeah,
of thinking about these
every
things,
time.
understanding their true objectives, and then based on those objectives, you help them plot out their plan, which is why it's so much better getting advice from someone like you than getting some one way snippet off of Instagram. So I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah,
We've talked about credit cards. Are there any other You're a former bank attorney, so you were working the other side of this equation for a long
I was.
time. Are there any other insights, maybe misconceptions, just in general, that you find we as the general public have about credit card debt or credit card usage that you think it would be in the consumer's best interest to know?
So if you settle for less than the full amount, your credit score will be impacted. And 9 out of 10 times when you're in court, if you're pro se, if you're not represented by an attorney, you haven't had the opportunity to speak with someone, an attorney like myself, you'll end up settling the account for less than the full amount without knowing what the consequences are. Now, if you've had a discussion with an attorney, they've educated you, you've made the decision to go down that path of debt settlement where your credit score will be impacted, but then in 2 years will recover. That's another situation. However, going back to what you brought up in terms of misconceptions, there's a lot of debt buyers out there. And what I mean by debt buyers is when a company purchases the debt, and there's some banks that are notorious for just unloading their credit card debt. It's just common business practice, their business model. And two of them in specific that I represented, when you sell it to a debt buyer, the debt buyer has to prove that they own the debt. And it's not an easy hurdle for them to cross. There were instances where there were volunteer attorneys on the other side who would take these cases and they would say, we want a trial. We want a trial basically on a debt buyer case means the case is going to be, I have to dismiss the case. I have no choice because the debt buyer does not want to send a witness from the bank for a small, insignificant amount when these people are dealing with billions of dollars in debt a year. So you should always, whether it's a debt buyer or an original creditor, you should always request a debt validation. And you can Google it and come up with a template and make them prove to you that the debt is valid, even if it's an original creditor, but especially if it's a third party debt buyer. So the other thing to mention is you don't necessarily have to always pay back 100% of what you owe. There may be instances where, you know, the judge, the counsel for the bank, they might discount a portion of it, and there could be tax consequences, like you might have to file a 1099, and because it's if it's over $600 of forgiven amount in a given year. But with that being said, you don't there's no mandate that you have to pay back the full amount of what you've been sued for. There could be reasons, logical reasons, and explanations why the consumer can argue and advocate and say, I don't owe you 10,000 XYZ. I owe you 8,500 and this is why. So I've had those scenarios as well in court.
Do you ever recommend individuals to perhaps just try to negotiate for themselves? Because what you were just saying rang a bell in my head, because there are reasons that perhaps you could go back to a lender and say, "Hey, I don't really owe you 10 grand, I owe you $8,500." There are other times
Right.
that you may want to go back to them and say, "Yeah, I owe you $10,000, but I only got 5. Can we just call it a day?" How simple or difficult is that for the consumer to do themselves?
So that question is dependent on the bank attorney they're dealing with. I know a lot of my colleagues from other law firms were perhaps not as nice as I was. I was extra courteous to somebody who was not represented by an attorney, who would come to court by themselves. They would take the day off, they would lose work or lose half a day of work, whatever the case was. But I would just treat them as if they had an attorney next to them, as if they were being represented by an attorney. But I do know that's not the case for, I can't say the majority, for a certain percentage, that's not how it works out. It does make a significant difference if you're represented by an attorney rather than going it along, because you're in uncharted territory. You don't know the terms that are being tossed around. Sometimes people don't want to break it down to layman's terms. They just want to stay with the legalese. And there's other areas of law that I'm not familiar with the legalese, and I'm an attorney and I've been practicing for so many years. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it just reminds me of a conversation I was having with a friend of mine last week, and we were just talking about times that you maybe in just general tackle certain things on your own versus times that you want to enlist a professional. And I'm just speaking for myself. The one thing that I don't do based on personal experiences that we won't get into today
Sure.
is when I do need a lawyer, I want somebody who specializes in that particular brand of law. Because again, from my experience, a lawyer is a lawyer. It's not the way it works. You want somebody who specializes in the area you're dealing with, particularly if you, in your mind, have decided, hey, it's time to lawyer up.
Right.
That's one thing you don't skip on. That's just a little advice from me. Getting back to the subject. So, when a person is dealing with, let's say that litigation is involved
Okay.
and they have been served, how does a person know when to just give into that versus fight it, or just pay, or maybe even ignore the whole thing? Because I know people can get paralyzed when they get that type of thing. There are some people, it immediately brings so much fear to them that it's, if there's any way in the world I'm going to pay this, I'm going to pay it. Others maybe want to get help and fight it. And then others may even ignore it. So, how do you recommend people at least approach that decision point?
Okay. About a week ago, I saw I guess, advertisement by a national law firm that is in my field. And the first thing the person who is an attorney said is, "You've been served with papers. You should take a deep breath. I know it's stressful, but you should definitely not ignore it. When you ignore a lawsuit, the bank will make a motion for a default judgment to the court. So whether you've ignored the lawsuit or you've not appeared for a court date, a default judgment can be taken against you. And it depends what state you're in. In New York State, a default judgment is good for 20 years. And they can attach a bank account, they can freeze your bank account if they have a judgment, they can put a lien on your property, and they can even garnish your wages. I've seen all those scenarios happen in my years of practice as a bank attorney. So less common was liens on property. More common was frozen bank accounts. Now, you definitely need to respond if you've been served with papers. It depends in the state that you're in. It could be 20 days, it could be 30 days, but the sooner the better. You should go to the courthouse, go to the clerk's office, and put what's called file an answer, your response. The clerks are very nice. They'll assist in as much as they can because they're not allowed to give legal advice, of course, but they can guide a pro se litigant into that process. So they should definitely go file an answer. And then when the court date comes up, again, depending where you are, they do have, for people who have limited financial means, who can't afford an attorney, but they want representation, there are volunteer programs which are supported by grants, private and public, and they defend people who are in financial need, in financial distress. Never ignore a lawsuit. Whatever type of a lawsuit it is, whether it's a consumer credit transaction like we're talking about now, or any other type of lawsuit against you, because it's not going to do you any good in the long run.
So, to what extent does the type of debt factor into these type of decisions? Because you mentioned earlier credit card debt versus medical debt versus student loan debt. In terms of in general, and just
Yes.
a general conversation, in general, are the strategies different? Because, for example, I've always been under the assumption that as far as student loan debt, particularly when if it's federal student loan debt, there's not a whole lot of fight in that.
Yes. So I can't speak too much on behalf of the student loan and medical debt area other than to say each is a specialized area and each is governed by their own federal laws and state laws in terms of medical debt. As far as student loans, there's not much state law that goes into play. As far as credit card or consumer debt, we have our federal laws and we have our state laws as well that add more protections depending on the state you're in. So one factor as a bank attorney is the age of the debt. And what I mean by that is if a consumer had a credit card for a longer period of time, the bank was more willing to be flexible. If a consumer had the credit card for a shorter period of time, there was less flexibility on that account. So that's a factor that like plays into the equation when you go to court and you're ready to appear as a attorney and negotiate the case. Or if I was getting a phone call from somebody who was pro se or had their attorney calling me.
Right off the top of my head, and again, this is just from personal experience and people I know and that type of thing. One of the differentiators in my mind is the fact that credit card debt can be resold. And I've had people who have had credit card debt for many years. It got sold from A to B to C. And at some point, it just gets written off and goes away. Or they may hear from the third owner of that debt 5 years afterwards. It's really a who knows thing. I've heard of that with medical debt as well. I think less
Mhm.
frequently. That didn't happen with student loan debt,
No.
again, to my knowledge,
Yes.
and that's the thing that I think puts student loan debt, at least in my mind, in a little different category, and credit card debt, and maybe it's because out of all of the debts we're talking about here, typically, we can talk about the cost of medical treatments, and that's a whole different subject for a whole different
Correct.
day. Student loans, usually, particularly federal student loans, come with at least market interest rates. Credit cards, on the other hand, just the interest rates that you pay on credit cards. I've heard of more people being successful negotiating credit cards because it seems like that debt seems to be the most inflated just based on the interest that you're charging. But again, to your point, every situation is different. And that's why we're lucky to have professionals like you out there to help us sort through all these things. Let's talk for a minute about what happens after the debt is dealt with. So a person has worked with someone like you, they've been able to negotiate some type of settlement they're able to deal with. So their financial life is finally at least manageable and they can breathe a sigh of relief from day to day. And let's say it was credit card debt, the kind of aftercare for those situations, just to make sure that a person minimizes their chances of getting there again. That's where the financial literacy comes in. That's where financial
Definitely.
coaches like myself come in to help people to manage their dollars in a way where they don't get back into that credit card debt. From your perspective, could you share a little bit about how financial literacy can help people from falling back into debt once they've resolved the current crisis that they're dealing with?
Yeah. So I think the point you're bringing up right now is very important. I can't stress how important it is because if I've helped the client get out of debt, but then a certain time period later, whether it's a year or 6 months later, they've opened up a new credit card and now they're delinquent again, it does them no good. It does me no good. Financial literacy is very important. Having the client understand the basics of how to read a credit report, how to have a reasonable budget, talking with them and working with them and hand holding with them how to not only get back on track but to stay back on track and not fall back. It's very important, it's very valuable. It's something that sets me apart, sets attorneys like me apart from the other big players that you hear on social media and on TV because they don't, it's not part of the business model, most definitely.
So, with your firm, you actually provide that financial literacy training. You actually provide that what we'll call aftercare program, so to speak.
Yeah. So it's introduced in when I'm reviewing the case. So I introduce that to them. I tell clients that I would like for them to bring their three credit bureau reports to our in person consultation, or if we're meeting by Zoom or whatever method, video method, to email them to me so we can review them together and make sure that we're both on the same page and make sure they will tell me why they got into the position that they're in. And then I will help them understand what steps are going to be taken within the next 6 months, 12 months, etc. But then after that, they need to understand that they need to graduate from the program eventually. And when they graduate from the program, they need to keep it going. They need to keep the financial literacy in check.
So understand that you not only work with people on these kind of debt situations, but you also, and maybe it's a part of the same work, but as far as predatory lending and unfair collection practices, is that something that you deal with as a part of your core business of dealing with people who are in debt, or is that something, is that a separate venture of yours?
No, sometimes it can be wrapped up all in one. So sometimes a client can come to you who owes $10,000 in credit card debt and had a debt collector harassing them. So each violation of federal law is $1,000. So it's important to keep records. It's important to have things in writing. Hopefully, the clients or potential clients understand the importance of having an attorney on their side. And it's not separate, it comes as a package that is dealt with.
Yeah, and I can certainly see how the unfair collection. Yeah, and I can certainly see how the successful at times in getting people relief on the basis of the fact that predatory lending resulted in them being in the debt situation that they're in.
So, as far as a personal or a business loan is concerned, we'll review it. I can say that the banks have stepped up their game, and I don't see them doing much predatory lending as they did. And a lot of it has to do because banks don't want bad press. Bad press to a bank is detrimental financially. And at the end of the day, that's what the bank cares. They care about their financials. So if they can make sure that their financials are not impacted, their shareholders are happy, the board is happy, they're having a great day. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can certainly see the banks operating that way. Any advice for people dealing with, let's say that they don't feel as though their situation allows them to qualify for a loan from a conventional bank? There are all types of lenders out there that
Correct.
are more than happy to do the public service to help them out at astronomical interest rates. So, other than avoid them if at all possible, is there any other guidance or advice you have for listeners?
I would My advice to them, to all the listeners, would be to definitely avoid those lenders. I know it's tempting. I know you might need the finances, but please do not go to them. Do not go to lenders you've never heard of who are charging you in today's market over 20% on a loan. And then you always have to request the fine print. And this is again where an attorney comes in. A layman is not going to be able to understand the fine print as an attorney will. So it might be worth to spend for a consultation if an attorney is going to charge you, say, $100 or $200 to read a contract from a potential loan that you're thinking of getting from one of these lenders. It just might behoove you to do that and spend that money before you get yourself involved in something more significant where it's going to spiral out of control, where you're giving up all your rights and you don't know it.
So, if next week I happen to find myself at home in the middle of the day and I'm watching television and there are people dancing around talking about how X lender was able to get them fast cash and they're doing this and they're just so happy, I probably shouldn't take that number down and call it. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I've exactly went up against people in that line of business who prey upon individuals that can't qualify for a conventional loan. And it's if you switched into the area of mortgages, where we had the whole debacle, where people couldn't qualify for conventional mortgages, and then they started qualifying for these other types of hybrids and so on and so forth. So, yes, please stay away from payday loans or quick cash loans. Anything that sounds too good to be true is too good to be true. That should be a standard in your dictionary.
Absolutely. Maybe easy for me and you to say, maybe a little harder for some of our listeners, but the truth is the truth. Totally off the board question. I did a quick episode around the holidays about this. I believe they call it pay as you go. Is that what it's called? It's a new trend in lending. Any thoughts on that one way or the other? It's basically, I believe you purchase a product, you have X amount of time to pay it off. And as long as I believe you pay it off in such amount of time in installments, and this is directly from or offered by a retailer, that there's no interest charge. Any thoughts on that?
So, what you're mentioning is a business model that many credit card companies are looking to employ. I actually have a credit card company from a major bank that has that model, and they add a small fee. We can call it a convenience fee. They can call it whatever they want. It's basically an interest rate, but they're not calling it that because federally they're not allowed to. So stay away from those because again, you're giving up rights that you have no idea that you had in the first place. So definitely it's a major trend that's going on right now because people don't have the money to purchase it upfront and pay for it within 30 days when the statement comes due. So they spread it out over 4 months usually is a typical time period where I see. Stay away.
Yeah, and I always advise people to, one, don't fool with any product where you don't understand how the other side is making their money.
Yeah,
And 9 times out of 10, once you understand how the other side makes their money, that's a pretty good clue as far as whether or not you should do business with them, because it's like Vegas. If you're going to go, have a good time, but realize how the house makes its money. So, in any transaction of money, always make sure that the other side, you realize how they're making their money, because if you don't, it could be more than you expect out of your pocket.
right.
Efstathios, I've really enjoyed our conversation this evening. Before I let you go, house rules are on this podcast: if you have a podcast, you must talk about your podcast. I understand you have a podcast. Tell us a bit about it.
I do. So people can find it under the name of my law firm, Georgiou Law PLLC. It's available across all major platforms. I am in the process of trademarking my slogan, which I've changed. So this new slogan is clear your debt, claim your future. So that is what we're going to be applying for with the trademark office within the next week. And I talk about all different types of tactics that probably banks would not want you to know about, that pro se litigants can educate themselves about and make like a cheat sheet and go to court and defend yourself. But definitely, if you have the ability to hire an attorney, most definitely hire an attorney who is experienced in that field, who just doesn't do it as a side gig. Don't hire somebody who's a real estate attorney who says, "Yes, I can handle your credit card debt," because it's a different field.
Great advice. Great advice. We will put the links to both your online headquarters and the podcast directly in the show notes of this episode.
Thank you.
And again, I just want to thank you for your time. Haven't had the pleasure of doing, in my opinion, enough episodes around these subjects. We talk a lot on this podcast about your conventional methods of paying down debt, debt snowballs, debt avalanches, that type of thing. But for people in extreme situations, there's a little different tactic that you have to take. Thank you for sharing that with us. And also anything we can do on the consumer protection side, I'm always up for that. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being on CFO at Home today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.